Imagine the most impossible military victory in human history. A teenage peasant girl who had never seen a city, never held a sword, never commanded anything more than farm animals, convincing a king to give her an army, then using that army to defeat the greatest military machine in medieval Europe in 9 impossible days. This is the story of Joan of Arc and the Siege of Orléans. The moment when divine faith shattered human calculation, when a 17-year-old girl heard angels and saved France from total annihilation. October 1428. The English war machine has been crushing France for over a century. At Agincourt, 6,000 English slaughtered 25,000 French nobles in a single afternoon. The English longbow has become medieval Europe's unstoppable weapon, raining death from distances that make cavalry charges suicide. Medieval France will become nothing more than a footnote in English history. Now they've come for Orléans, the last fortress standing between them and total conquest, surrounded by a ring of war machines that has been tightening for 6 brutal months. The plan is simple: starve the city into submission. Inside the city, Jean the Bastard of Orléans, the illegitimate son of French royalty and the city's military commander, watches supplies dwindle with each passing week. The English have perfected siege warfare into an art form. They don't need to assault the walls. Time and hunger will do their work for them. If Orléans falls, France dies as a nation. And that's when God decides to intervene. 300 miles from Orléans, in a tiny village called Domrémy near the German border, a 17-year-old peasant girl named Joan staggers from her father's house. She's been hearing voices since she was 13, not whispers of madness, but the thunderous commands of Archangel Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. The message is always the same. You must go to France. You must drive out the English. This farm girl, who has never seen a city, never held a sword, never commanded anything more than sheep, somehow believes she can save France from the greatest military machine in medieval Europe. Her father threatens to drown her if she doesn't abandon this madness. The local captain, Robert de Baudricourt, laughs in her face and tells his men to slap some sense into her. Village priests declare her possessed by demons. But Joan doesn't waver. She returns to Baudricourt again and again, describing English military disasters before news reaches the frontier. She predicts the Battle of the Herrings down to the day it happens. Finally, in February 1429, Baudricourt looks into this peasant girl's eyes and sees something that terrifies him more than the English army. Absolute, unshakable certainty. His words, recorded by witnesses: "She may be mad, but if God is with her, we are all dead men if we refuse." He gives her an escort to the royal court. Joan dresses in soldier's clothing and begins an 11-day journey through enemy-occupied territory. She's traveling directly through English patrols that would torture and execute her instantly if they discovered a French peasant girl claiming divine mission. She reaches Chinon Castle in early March. Joan walks into the throne room where 300 courtiers wait to test this peasant girl who claims God speaks through her. Charles VII has hidden himself among the nobles. If she truly has divine vision, she should recognize him instantly. Joan walks directly through the crowd to an unremarkable man in plain clothes standing in the shadows. No crown, no throne, nothing to distinguish him from dozens of other courtiers. She addresses the Dauphin directly, declaring herself sent by the King of Heaven to see him anointed and crowned at Reims, and that he shall be lieutenant of the King of Heaven, who is King of France. The court erupts in chaos. Half the nobles cry witchcraft, the other half whisper about miracles. But Charles takes Joan aside for a private conversation. What happens next remains secret to this day. Joan tells Charles something that only God could know, something so personal, so devastating, that it transforms the broken king instantly. Charles emerges from their meeting as a different man. The uncertainty is gone. The fear has vanished. For the first time in his life, he acts like a king. He orders his greatest theologians to examine this girl. For 3 weeks, the finest minds in France question her about theology, military strategy, divine revelation, and the nature of her voices. Their unanimous verdict: we find only good in her. On March 22, 1429, Charles VII gives Joan of Arc an army. Joan doesn't just want soldiers, she wants saints. At Blois, where her army assembles, she implements the most radical military reforms in medieval history. Before she will march, every man in her army must confess his sins. Camp followers and prostitutes are expelled. Blasphemy becomes punishable. The army attends Mass together every morning. Her armor is gleaming white plate that makes her visible across any battlefield. Her sword is a legendary blade she claims angels told her to find behind the altar at Sainte Catherine de Fierbois, and it's exactly where she said it would be. But the most extraordinary transformation happens to the soldiers themselves. Veteran warriors, including hardened captains who have spent years in taverns and brothels, suddenly find themselves unable to swear or feel carnal desires in Joan's presence. This isn't military training, this is spiritual warfare preparation. By late April, Joan commands 3,000 men who have transformed from defeated rabble into a force of divine retribution. They're ready to attempt the impossible. They're ready to break the Siege of Orléans. April 29th, 1429. Joan's convoy approaches Orléans as the sun sets, their white banners gleaming like stars in the darkness. The English have 9 massive fortresses positioned to annihilate any relief force. But Joan has planned something the English never expected. While her main force creates a diversion on the western side, Joan slips into the city through the eastern gate under cover of darkness. The one approach the English couldn't completely seal due to insufficient manpower. The moment she enters Orléans, everything changes. Citizens who have been preparing for 6 months of starvation suddenly flood the streets with torches and food. Soldiers who were planning surrender begin sharpening their weapons. The city that was ready to die transforms into a fortress ready to kill. The bastard of Orléans, Jean de Dunois, meets Joan at the gate. He's a veteran of multiple defeats, a pragmatic commander who understands the mathematics of siege warfare. He looks at this 17-year-old peasant girl in gleaming white armor and sees military disaster. He suggests that the English positions are too strong, that they should wait for more reinforcements. Joan stares at him with eyes that have seen angels. In God's name, she declares, the men-at-arms will fight and God will give victory. That night, Joan walks through the streets of Orléans, distributing food to civilians and paying soldiers from her own purse. But the English aren't impressed by peasant girls and religious displays. They've been winning this war for over a century through superior tactics and discipline. They have no idea that they're about to witness the impossible. May 4th, 1429. Joan wakes from an afternoon nap to discover that the bastard of Orléans has launched an attack on the English fortress of Saint-Loup without telling her. She leaps onto her horse, still wearing a house dress, orders her banner brought to her, and charges toward the battle. French assault has already failed. French soldiers are retreating in panic from the English stronghold. English longbowmen are cutting them down as they flee. It's the same story France has seen for 100 years. English discipline crushing the French courage. Then Joan appears on the battlefield like an avenging angel, her white banner snapping in the wind behind her. Every retreating French soldier stops running. They turn around, and they charge back into certain death. But something impossible happens. The English arrows that have been slaughtering French knights for decades suddenly seem to lose their power. The fortress of Saint-Loup, which should have held for weeks, falls in less than an hour. As the English garrison flees in panic, Joan does something that shocks her own soldiers. She kneels beside the English dead and weeps. She tells Jean d'Aulon that they died without confession and prays that God will have mercy on their souls. May 6th, Joan leads the assault on Les Augustins, an English fortress built around a monastery. The attack is suicidal. The English position is nearly impregnable, and their longbowmen have clear fields of fire across open ground. Medieval military wisdom says you never assault prepared positions, you siege them. Joan doesn't care about medieval military wisdom. She plants her white banner directly on the enemy walls and dares her soldiers to be less brave than a teenage girl. The English watch in growing horror as French soldiers scale walls that should be unscalable. Les Augustins falls by sunset. That night, the English commanders hold an emergency council of war. For the first time in living memory, English positions are falling to French assault. The impossible is becoming inevitable. William de la Pole, Earl of Suffolk, stares at maps that no longer make sense. His veteran soldiers are reporting that French troops seem immune to arrows. One captain whispers about witchcraft. Suffolk dismisses the suggestion, but his voice lacks conviction. How else do you explain French peasants walking through English arrow fire like it's spring rain? Meanwhile, Joan kneels in Orléans Cathedral, praying through the night. Tomorrow will bring the final test, the assault on Les Tourelles, the massive fortress guarding the bridge over the Loire River. If it falls, the English siege is broken. Everything depends on the next 24 hours. May 7th, 1429. Dawn breaks over the Loire River to reveal the most formidable fortress in medieval France, Les Tourelles. Joan stands on the walls of Orléans, studying the fortress through the morning mist. Jean d'Aulon approaches her carefully. He suggests that perhaps they should consider a longer siege, that Les Tourelles cannot be stormed. Joan turns to him with absolute certainty blazing in her eyes. Today, before evening, she declares, we shall enter by the bridge. The assault begins at dawn. French soldiers charge across the narrow causeway towards certain death. English arrows fall like deadly rain. French knights drop by the dozens. It's Agincourt all over again. English discipline slaughtering French bravery. Then Joan appears at the front of the assault, carrying her banner instead of a sword. She climbs the first scaling ladder personally, placing herself in the most dangerous position on the battlefield. An English crossbow bolt pierces her shoulder just above the breast, driving her backwards off the ladder onto the stone causeway. English soldiers cheer. The witch is down. Blood pools beneath Joan's white armor. But Joan isn't finished. She pulls the crossbow bolt from her own shoulder, binds the wound with strips torn from her banner, and climbs back up the ladder. She shouts that they must go forward, that God wills it, that the fortress will be taken. As Joan plants her banner on the English walls for the second time, every French soldier in the assault suddenly believes they are fighting alongside angels. They become unstoppable. English veterans who have held their positions against impossible odds for decades suddenly break and run. Arrows that have never missed their targets fly wide. Walls that have never been breached crumble beneath French axes. French soldiers pour into Les Tourelles like an avenging flood. The Siege of Orléans is broken, but the English aren't finished. They have one final card to play. May 8th, 1429. Dawn reveals the entire English army drawn up in battle formation outside Orléans. This is it, the moment England has been preparing for over a century. Open battle. English longbows against French cavalry. The scenario where English forces have never lost. Inside Orléans, French commanders argue fiercely. This is their chance to destroy the English army completely. Joan refuses. She declares simply that today is Sunday, and it would be wrong to spill blood on the Lord's Day unless they are attacked first. For 1 hour, the two armies stare at each other across the field. French cavalry paw the ground, eager to charge. English longbowmen draw their bowstrings, but Joan stands perfectly still on the walls of Orléans, her white banner motionless in the morning air. Then the impossible happens. The English army, the force that has never retreated, never shown weakness, never doubted their own invincibility, turns around and marches away. They abandon their siege engines. They burn their supplies. They leave behind the strongest position they've held in France. The Siege of Orléans is over. After 6 months, 2 weeks, and 5 days, the English war machine has been broken by a 17-year-old peasant girl who heard angels. The news of Orléans spreads across Europe like wildfire. The English, who have seemed invincible for over a century, have been defeated by a teenage girl carrying a banner instead of a sword. Within 5 weeks, Joan leads French forces to capture every English stronghold in the Loire Valley. Jargeau falls in 3 days. English stronghold Meung-sur-Loire surrenders without fighting. Beaugency is abandoned by its English garrison. At the Battle of Patay, Joan's forces destroy an entire English army, 2,000 English dead for 20 French casualties. It's Agincourt in reverse. English tactical superiority shattered by French divine inspiration. On July 17, 1429, Charles VII is crowned King of France at Reims Cathedral, with Joan standing beside him in full armor, her white banner reflecting the stained glass light like captured starlight. The impossible has become inevitable. But Joan's story doesn't end at Orléans. 1 year later, she's captured by Burgundian allies of the English at Compiègne. The English buy her for 10,000 gold pieces and put her on trial for heresy. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc is burned at the stake in the marketplace of Rouen. She's 19 years old. Her last word is Jesus. 22 years later, the English are expelled from all of France except Calais. The 100 Years' War ends with French victory. Joan's 9 days at Orléans didn't just save France, they proved that impossible faith could overcome inevitable force, that divine will could shatter human calculation, that a peasant girl with absolute conviction could reshape the medieval world. This is why we remember the Siege of Orléans, when heaven broke the gates of hell and saved France forever.